Okay, everybody, welcome back. Season 10, episode 18 here. This is the first time having three guests on, so bear with us a little bit, but we're going to do something a little bit different here. This is the first time having three culturally competent therapists in our first responder military community on to kind of go through some questions, do like a Q&A setting. These questions came from a first responder in Northern California who she went to a bunch of her fellow first responders and we're like, hey, what are some common questions that you have? So I worked with Brooke to be able to be like, hey, let's go through some of these questions, get some other therapists on, and here we are. So really quick, I'm just going to mention our podcast sponsor, Brain Performance Technologies. They're doing specialty mental health work, working on like TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. You can listen to season 9, episode 20, the podcast to learn more about them. And then for our nonprofit, we're over $338,000 spent in therapy, 3,184 therapy sessions either fully covered or financially assisted. And then 307 people have gone through us to get connected to our therapist. So two of you in the room, I guess room, quote unquote, are top contracted therapists. I appreciate you guys and what you do. Jena, I will have to figure something out, you know. So let's just go around, do quick little intros. Jena, we'll kind of start with you if you're okay with that. Just keep it short, brief, and then we'll jump into it.
Awesome. I'm Dr. Jena Kiser, almost said Casas, just got married, Dr. Jena Kiser. I'm a licensed clinical and police and public safety psychologist in Nevada.
I'm Dr. Brooke Bartlett. I am a first responder and military psychologist based in Boise, Idaho.
And I'm Dr. Thalia Nicholson. I'm licensed in California, Nevada, and Idaho, and I work with first responders and military service members.
Sweet. Those were nice and brief. Look at that. Well, first, I want to say, like, as a first responder and service member myself, it's so important to have therapists that are culturally competent to do all this training, to do the work, to help our kind of like messed up community. You know, we see a lot of stuff. So, thank you for what the three of you do. So we're just going to jump into it. So, question number one, in general, are there any red flag behaviors to look out for with a therapist? Do these tend to be apparent from the beginning, or can they occur after working together for some time? So, Thalia, can we start with you?
Yeah, I'm just thinking like that's a really loaded question. I feel like there's a lot of red flags that we can look for in other clinicians. The ones that I mean, the most apparent one that I always talk about with potential patients or family or friends that are looking for services is really looking at to see if the clinician provides evidence-based treatments. And a lot of people don't really know that terminology, but it is essentially the therapies that have been highly researched, have been backed by clinical trials, and they're like the first line treatment. As if you were to go to see your PCP, you'd hope that they would give you the first line medication. Same with your providers for therapy. So I think the one of the red flags is seeing clinicians who are essentially on their website advocating for therapy services that maybe haven't been backed by research, so we don't know how effective they are, which kind of goes with another red flag of a clinician not essentially seeking consent from their patients when they are providing treatments that maybe haven't been backed by the research. So that's another kind of little red flag of like, okay, like are they being honest about how effective this can be? And that's not to say that the treatments that haven't been highly researched can't be effective, but it's, getting buy-in from your patient and them knowing what they're getting.
Got it. Thank you for
Yeah,
sharing, Brooke.
I'd second that. And just to kind of, when she's saying evidence based treatment, for example, if you're talking about trauma, the three gold standards or top two gold standards would be cognitive processing therapy and prolonged exposure. The third would be EMDR. Those are the evidence based treatments for trauma. And I see a lot of clinicians saying that they're trauma informed. Anyone can say they're trauma informed. That's very different than being highly trained in these evidence-based gold standard treatments. I'd also say that if someone says that they are a trauma specialist, for example, but they only do one modality, they might be a specialist in that modality, but they're not a trauma specialist, because not everyone is a good fit, for example, for EMDR. But if that's all someone's got on the table, it might be a great fit for some people, but not for others. So a true trauma specialist is trained across the board in these evidence-based modalities, and especially in the mechanisms that we actually utilize to see the change in treatment. So I'd say that. And I'd also say there's a lot of red flags, but along with that, someone who only uses lived experience as their means of, this is what makes me good at what I do. Hey, lived experience on top of evidence-based training, that's the sweet spot. That's an excellent addition to that. But only lived experience is not equivalent to being actually competent in either working with a certain population and or trauma. So just because someone's had cancer doesn't mean that they are competent in treating cancer, is kind of like the example I like to use.
And I have a little bit of a different angle that I want to add to this. I love that Dr. Thalia and Dr. Brooke talked about like treatment approaches and the way that it might feel in the room for the client, making sure that expertise fits. But I wanted to talk about a relational red flag. In general, when you think about the therapeutic relationship, there's a lot of similarities to other relationships that you might have with any other person. And the main pillar of those relationships is safety. So if you don't feel safe in the relationship with the provider physically or emotionally to be able to be open and honest about your concerns, what you're going through, if you don't feel like the trust is there or you're not being respected in some way, that would be a red flag. And I don't know if this is something that you'd be able to see coming from a mile away before you get into the room with someone. Obviously, the more data that you get, the more time you spend with them, the better and more clear this will be. But if you start getting these little glimmers that the provider is unreliable or inconsistent, they're crossing your boundaries frequently or crossing their own boundaries, things that were set up in the informed consent paperwork, those are the hints that you can keep taking to decide whether or not therapy is going to be effective with that provider, of what they can offer for you.
Got it. Yeah, I appreciate it. That's cool to hear everybody's opinion and Jenna kind of bringing in a different angle there. And I think one of the things, and I can kind of give some insight here too, like as a police officer for over 10 years and military for over 12 years, is like a lot of people don't even know what these trauma-based modalities are, kind of the things that you mentioned, right? They hear EMDR, CPT, and they're like, what the hell are those acronyms? You know what I mean? So I think, and that's kind of why, like with the Overwatch Collective, what we've done and what our goal is to have multiple therapists in every single state, to do a podcast with every single one of them, but then also to become a top contracted therapist. We kind of do that work for that first responder service member to kind of take that guessing game out of it. Because I don't know if some of the EAPs are doing thorough vetting. I've heard some are, but a majority are not. So, we'll talk about this later, but if you go for the first time to a therapist and it's not what you thought, or you're seeing a lot of red flags and they're like, okay, I'm done, I'm out, I'm never going to therapy again. So sweet. Okay, question number 2. What is ineffective therapy versus harmful therapy? What situations should result in terminating therapy together versus what kinds of behavior should be reported? Jenna, can we start with you?
Sure. This one's tough because for people that aren't maybe necessarily in the field, they might not know that this question could also be a little bit political. And so I'm going to just zoom back and take a really general perspective of this. An easy way to think about ineffective versus harmful therapy is in the names. Ineffective meaning generally doesn't work, doesn't do anything to treat the problem that the client's coming in with, and harmful being does actual damage and can make clients worse throughout the process. What I've seen is that when you have an ineffective therapy, generally the therapist is well intentioned. So they have every intention to work with this client. They're motivated. They care a lot about them. They're staying focused in sessions, but the client either initially has a little bit of improvement and then it stagnates, or there's no improvement from the first session all the way to, whenever they're having a conversation about if it's working or not. Whereas harmful therapy, there will be these degradations in the client's progress. So they actually will get worse during sessions or after sessions. You'll see them deteriorate, and things that maybe weren't problems before become problems. The list of, like, I wish I could give a list of just here are the list of harmful therapies. It's not as simple as that. But I think if you look at what the research is telling us, is if you can invite the client as part of the feedback process, and the provider is the one that's getting that feedback at the end of sessions and is tracking with assessment measures to look at the things that are important to the client, you can see whether or not a well-intentioned provider is going to make an effort to pivot and do something that would work, or not. But again, the issue with the harmful therapy is a lot of time there's negligence involved in that, and it doesn't matter on the therapist side. If there's negligence, they're not going to be able to utilize that feedback and make any changes that would be useful. So it's complicated.
Got it.
So add to that is like kind of going back to the metaphor of going and seeing your medical provider, right? Like some of the treatments are not always the best fit. It depends patient to patient, and sometimes it takes finessing things a little bit to find the perfect fit for treatment. So it's the same thing with therapy, right? Sometimes we need to finesse things, and that's because we're human. We don't fit into this perfect box of like CPT or EMDR working perfectly exactly like the protocol, like it's been researched, because we're in a clinical environment. We're not in a research setting, right? And so it's being able to have those conversations, like Jena was saying, is being able to track that objective outcomes while also having those honest conversations with your clinician. And if it's ineffective because of the relationship with the clinician, that's also okay, right? Like we don't always mesh personality wise, or the treatments that your clinician may be offering are just not a good fit. That's normal, right? Just like you go for your medical providers, you can decide who you want to see if you want to see them again. And it's having those conversations, because a competent clinician or an effective clinician will give you additional resources that will meet the needs that maybe they were unable to do effectively.
Yes. And I would say a couple different things. So to what Jena was saying is, in some of these, for example, evidence-based treatments for trauma, I tell folks that things can feel a little bit worse in the immediate aftermath. So just because something feels worse when you leave a session doesn't necessarily mean that, everything's gone to hell or anything, but it should start to improve, right? If we're 4 or 5 weeks in and I'm either not feeling any better or I'm feeling worse without any noticeable changes, that might be then the time to kind of be like, okay, what's going on here? Along with that is kind of to the first question, when we're thinking about ineffective versus harmful, it can be very harmful when a clinician is acting out of their scope, without the competency, without the training. I hear it and I see it all the time. I have firefighters and military come to me who've gone through the ringer with therapists who had no business trying to actually treat what they were coming in with, and it was harmful to them, extremely harmful to them. So I would also emphasize again, when you are looking for a therapist, interview them. Like really interview them, research them. I provide a 15-minute free consult call, for example. Interview them, like ask them. You say you specialize in trauma. What does that mean? What's your training, right? They start saying, well, I'm married to a law enforcement officer and my dad was blah, blah. Okay, what else, right? So you have the power to do that too.
Can I say one more thing on this? Because you jogged my memory on this, Brooke.
Mhm.
This is for the clinicians listening, maybe not so much like the audience members, because like you had talked about, Greg, people might not know what these acronyms are for therapy and exactly what they're looking for. But for the clinicians listening, if you are stating that you're competent to treat first responder populations, part of that training needs to include suicide prevention. And one of the biggest misalignments that I see in this is where people will understand trauma treatments, but they don't add on the addition of the suicide prevention or intervention at all. And so I think that's a huge issue where you might get into session with someone and realize that you can't meet your needs. And if you're not aware that that's a key component of working with this population, I think that could be harmful, incredibly harmful.
Too.
Yeah, go.
Okay. I was going to say, when you were saying like research them, look into them, utilize those consultation calls, it was making me think of like, okay, I've had people say, okay, but what do I look for? And one of the biggest things for me is seeing some clinicians who will list out multiple things that they are specialized in. Speaking for me, and I think for the three of us, as psychologists who've been in school for maybe too long of a time, we're not even competent to treat everything under the sun, right? And so if you're seeing a clinician who lists being able to treat everything and that they specialize in all of this, it's probably a red flag, right? And then another thing that I tell people is, at least on my website, I list the treatments, the evidence-based treatments that I do, so my patients can go and actually Google it, right? And it'll give you the short blurb of what it is. So you can be more informed, just like you do, at least most people do for their medications, right? And so you can see, okay, is this treatment highly effective? What is the support for it, and so forth.
Specialization
Anybody,
really means
I was going
something.
to say,
Like,
anybody else want to add anything?
it means something. And everyone says they're specialized now, but like specialization really means something. And I very much differentiate what I'm specialized in versus what I'm not. For example, I'm competent in treating OCD, but past a certain severity, it's not a specialization of mine, right? And so I can treat, I treat like a lot of people with trauma come in also with maybe some comorbid, meaning like co-occurring OCD symptoms. And I got that, right? But if someone's coming in, they need a true specialist, I'm referring out because I don't specialize in that. Specialization is, I mean, the three of us here spent 10 years, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of hours being trained, supervised, practicing how to actually do these things. That's why we say we specialize in it. But to what Thalia was saying, you'll see, people, whether they're psychologists or master's level, like associate, meaning they're in their first year doing clinical work, and they'll say, I specialize in personality disorders, treating trauma, anxiety, depression, children, adults, perimenopause, like all of this. No one with all the degrees can specialize in everything. So that is also a massive red flag.
Yeah. So I sense this, and I've heard this before, where it's very frustrating when people say like, oh, just like what Brooke said, like I have the lived experience, so I want to become a top contracted therapist, right? We're like, nope, sorry, we need a little bit more than that. And then we've even had it sometimes too, and heard about it where therapists will probably kind of know that they're not helping or like being beneficial to the client, but it's just they see it like the money part, right? Where
Yep.
that could be a really bad red flag and be hurtful for that first responder service member. So,
Yeah.
um,
And
anything else on that one?
that's when you should tell your patient, right? Like, it doesn't mean anything. I think as clinicians, we try to be as cognizant of our behavior, right? And how well we're doing things because that's like our job. We want our patients to feel better, right? But it's noticing when our patients are also not improving and discussing and problem solving. And if it means that what the resources you have can't help them, that's okay, right? And a lot of people, I think, in private practice, sorry, I'm going to take that back. Some people in private practice world are about the money. And so they will say they do these time limited evidence based treatments, and then they have these patients on their caseload for years. That's not an evidence based treatment, especially for PTSD, anxiety, panic disorder, depression. Of course, some people with like high severity or high acuity do need long term treatment. And that's okay, right? Or if they're doing psychodynamic, that is a long term treatment. But it is also a red flag if a clinician is saying that they do evidence based treatments, but then you start getting signs or hearing from them that they typically see their patients for a very long time.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, because ultimately the goal for us and to spread is like, hey, get into therapy, get the right therapist, do the work, and then like slow it down a little bit where it's like maybe you just need to check in once a year or twice a year or something.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, question number 3, moving right along. What kind of contacts are appropriate outside of the therapy sessions?
I'll go.
You guys want to go first? I have like a kind of biased view on this.
Okay. So I lean towards, I don't have any contact with my clients unless it's hey, I need to cancel my appointment, right? Or hey, do you have another appointment time? Now, again, that's what I think is the best and the safest. Now, once in a while, like I remember with a psychologist I had a few years ago, I think it's when I got matched to my top spot at the San Diego VA. And I texted my psychologist, said, I got it. And she said, amazing, congrats, right? I think that can be, that's appropriate here and there. But outside of that, you're not having contact with your therapist, you're not texting with your therapist through social media. I tell my clients, I have a public business social media. If they're, DMing me, things like that, I'm not talking with my clients through social media. They're more than welcome to follow me. They want to follow me. Many of them do. But, if they are messaging me GIFs or doing things like that, or I'm trying to elicit conversation with them, that is not appropriate. So some therapists might have a little bit more of a liberal view on it, but there should not be conversation with clients outside of therapy if it is not related to the therapy. What do you guys think?
I think Jenna and I might have a maybe similar perspective. But I trained in rural Appalachia in Northeast Tennessee, where sometimes you're inevitably going to have dual relationships with your patients because it's such a small community. I was the only one of the few at the time that specialized in first responders. And so I would see them out in the community more than likely. And there were sometimes we had overlap with like work I was doing within the department. And that's because it was just me, right? But it's getting the patient's consent from the very beginning, right? And saying, hey, we're in a really small community. This is, if you see me out in public, I'm not going to come up to you. It's not because I don't care to, but I don't want to break patient confidentiality. You're welcome to come say a quick hi to me though. Or, hey, I have this gig coming up in your department. How do you feel comfortable with me taking this on? How are we going to approach each other if it comes up, right? And I say Jenna and I might have similar perspectives because she's in serving a lot of rural Nevada. But I'm also with Brooke. I don't have texting abilities with my patients because I don't want to have as much openness, and I also don't offer crisis services. So I don't want to feel like I'm as readily available. So email me, call me, and I will get back to you at our earliest convenience.
Yeah, I should clarify. I was talking about like I do a lot of work with agencies, and sometimes some of the peer supporters will be seeing me. And I always tell them in the first session, hey, this is what this looks like, but here's what's not okay. I can't be taking, if you're like the peer lead, I can't be taking phone calls and talking to you about a peer support concern for 20 minutes. That would be too much of a dual relationship. But of course, in the first responder world, I am around a lot of the people that I've worked with in the therapy room, and that's okay. But outside of those interactions, I'm not inviting conversations or engaging in non-therapy oriented conversations with my clients.
Like inviting them to dinner or grabbing a drink, like that is that is hopefully
It
a lot of people
happens a
know this,
lot.
but if your clinician is inviting you places or asking to get together or texting you about non-clinical scheduling things,
I feel like that
consider
happens a lot,
call.
especially through social media now. The ones that are like very open on social media, they'll be going back and forth with their clients about like, oh my God, where'd you get that dress? I got it here. Like, where'd you get yours? And blah, 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 like that. It's not appropriate.
Yeah, I think everything you guys said I agree with, and it's neat that the different approaches were about like what happens if we see people in the community, or what happens if we want to communicate with them by phone, or what about the virtual space because that's become so big and we all have presences there. It's how we all met, which is pretty cool. Social media can be a great thing, but I think it's the who's the person, what are the problems that you're dealing with, and how that they're dealing with, and how what's your approach. There are particular people with specific problems and therapeutic approaches, like Dr. Thalia was talking about, where you are a crisis line. So you are able to have communication with somebody at 2 in the morning. And it is about the therapeutic relationship, or it is about, the crisis that they're going through. And that's perfectly acceptable. but all of that should be clarified in the informed consent and gone over at every session about whether or not that information is appropriate or not, or it's working for both of those individuals. For me specifically, and I love that you brought up the part about the rural work, it's almost unavoidable to have boundary crossings when you're in a small community, but that's very different than a boundary violation. I might see somebody at a grocery store when I do my rural travel because it's the only grocery store, and one of my clients their kids might work at the grocery store. And so now it's a, this kind of situation that I have to navigate. But the crossing is, I need to get my needs met and they need to get their needs met. And we do it with the least amount of intrusion possible. And then the minute we're in a session together, we communicate about that crossing and how everybody felt about it. So there's intention behind, we know it's unavoidable, but did we go about it in a way that was useful for everyone here? And if you're the client wondering, like, is the contact appropriate or not, I would dig a little bit deeper into what's telling you it might not be. Because the therapeutic relationship, this is where it differs than other relationships. There is a power imbalance, and you are utilizing it for a very particular means. They're not your friends, they're not your family. They do care about you, but there's absolutely needs to be those boundaries in place in order for you to be successful in that space and then eventually graduate.
Yeah, and I think both of you said this too, but like I talk to my folks about this in their first session. I go over the consent form, I go over practice policies, and if there's a chance that I might run into or have some kind of other association with my client, like I said, like if I'm working with an agency and their peer support team and the client is a peer supporter, I'm talking to them about this and I say, hey, this should be an ongoing conversation. If we start running into things, we need it. So this isn't just a one-time thing. But I also tell clients, again, I side pack means I practice in 43 states. So if there's a client that contacts me randomly in a state that I'm never in or associated with, I'm typically not saying it on the upfront, but someone local or someone where, I know I'm going to a speaking engagement where they're going to be there, I'll say, hey, so if I run into you, I'm not going to acknowledge you first. You're welcome to acknowledge me, but I won't be engaging in too much conversation outside of that, right? So welcome to say hello, blah, 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 but I'm not going to be sitting there chatting it up with you for 45 minutes in that situation. So again, putting that comfort and that comfortability in the client's hands, you're more than welcome to acknowledge me, but I'm not going to go, oh, hey, great, good to see you. All right, see you next week, right?
I like it. I like it. This is good, Eddies. Yeah, and then, like this one specifically, obviously, so like my wife works with members of the police department that I work at. I don't know if you could hear that lightning and thunder out here. I get to work in this stuff after. That's fun. But my wife works with fellow police officers at my department, so that's a whole different level of like boundary, because there will be times when it's like, oh yeah, you may have been on a call or you may have done X, Y, and Z with somebody that's been in my office, and like we've had to navigate that level of confidentiality, which is pretty wild. But it's very important, obviously, the confidentiality. I think you guys kind of all touched on it, and I'm like sitting here absorbing all this as like the first responder and military dude, and I'm like, that's exactly what I would want. I would not want my therapist coming up and being like, hey Greg, so good session last week, or how are things going with this? So then my buddies in the room could be like, oh, how does Jena or Thalia know about my baseball game? You know what I mean? So maintaining that confidentiality. Okay, cool. Question number 4. Is it okay to tell your therapist that you don't want to talk about something? When is it appropriate for a therapist to challenge that? And when should a therapist respect not wanting to discuss that topic?
I like this one. I think this comes up for all three of us because of the trauma work we do. And I think that's it could be a normal response from a patient, right? Saying, I don't want to go there. I don't want to talk about it. And if it's because of avoidance, right? As a clinician, we discuss how that can keep us stuck in the recovery process with PTSD. Ultimately, though, the patient is the consumer of our services. They ultimately get to pick what they disclose and what they don't disclose. And if we tell them, hopefully there's like another kind of verbal consent process of, hey, I'm noticing that we're not discussing this topic, and this may be related to X, Y, and Z that you're experiencing. And they still say, I don't want to go there. Okay, well, we may not see as much progress in treatment. How do you feel about that? And if they say, yeah, that's fine, I'm not going there, then they've consented to knowing that that progress may look different then. Um, so it's like balancing respect and like autonomy of our patient while also providing them with the psychoeducation as to why some of those topics that we're avoiding may actually be causing the current impairment we're experiencing.
Yeah, I use the student driver analogy a lot in my therapy practice. It's like my clients are the ones that are in the student seat and I'm, next to them, but I have this still have the full access to a steering wheel and brakes. And so if they need me to take over, absolutely, but I'm going to encourage them to control some of the pacing and some of the depth at which we go because their readiness and their willingness to go there is everything. If it's about me and my desire to place them in a spot where I think it would benefit them, but they're not along for the ride, that's misalignment. And that's going to lead to a rupture. So I think it's balancing, it's a dance in therapy all of the time. But I use the student driver analogy to be like, you're in control. If you're telling me you're not ready, let's talk about what it would take to get you ready. So now the conversation's not about let's go talk about the scary thing. It's let's talk about getting you ready. We just move it back one notch to the place where you are. And I think that's the being specialized helps because if you do this a lot, you can see what's avoidance versus other things.
Yeah, I fully agree with what they're both saying, and they keep saying avoidance because in trauma work, so the heartbeat, the lifeline of any trauma related condition such as PTSD is avoidance. So every evidence-based treatment, cognitive processing therapy, prolonged exposure, EMDR, is actually targeting avoidance because as long as the avoidance is still there, so will be the condition. So when they're saying referencing avoidance, that's what they're talking about. So these evidence-based treatments are targeting that. Now, along with what they're both saying is one, I spend a lot of time like, I don't just throw them straight into the deep end of the pool, right? And so we're spending sessions going in explaining how something like PTSD develops, the role of avoidance, blah, blah, and here's why we're doing this work. Here's what this is going to look like. So they're already having an idea of that. And if we start seeing some trauma-related avoidance occurring, gently kind of reminding what this is. Also, this is expected because for some, they've been engaging in this for 10, 20, 30 years. But ultimately, like both Thalia and Jena said, is, if they're at the point where it's just not, like, I'm not going to say, no, you have to do this, right? So it's kind of balancing these two things. And again, as Jena said, is, someone who's a true specialist in this is better able to kind of suss out what's going on and then respond and adapt accordingly.
Cool. Anybody else got anything or next question? Next question it is. All right. How much self-disclosure from a therapist is appropriate? What if I don't resonate personally with what they share or find it relevant to my situation, sense of self, or beliefs?
Go for it,
Brooke's
Brooke.
on the edge of her seat. Brooke.
No, I think this is such an important question. In answer to whoever asked this one, if you're asking this question, find a new therapist. When we're thinking about as therapists, if and when we do self-disclose, it should be done very mindfully, very thoughtfully, and taking into consideration the intention behind it. I see a lot of therapists, like on social media, etc., that completely are acting unethically with how much they share personally. And you'll see their defense is, I'm human. Sure, you are, but there are still ethical considerations that we as therapists need to take into consideration. Because as Jena said, it is very different than someone who's a business consultant and is taking their clients out and they're getting drinks and they're going to baseball games. It's very different. There's a power differential. This is a space that it's extremely important. It's the number one thing that we see over and over again in the research determines prognosis and outcome is the therapeutic relationship client to clinician. So someone who is disclosing so much about themselves, their lives, what they're feeling like that day, what they're going through, et cetera, is likely inappropriate. I can't really think of any situations in which case that would be appropriate. And I hear this all the time from my first responders and military who come from another therapist, that they're like, my therapist talked about themselves all the time in the session. Like, that should not happen. I am almost never talking about myself unless it's to kind of like for example, I work with a lot of clients who even aren't in public safety, but are in high stress careers, right? And they might say, like, we might be working on like regulating their nervous system because they're in the go, go, go. And I could say, hey, I totally get, what you're experiencing, as someone who is in a fast paced world as well. Like, I totally get this, right? But that's about it, right? So yeah, there is a lot of no-nos when it comes to disclosure, and I'll let Thalia or Jena take over.
So I love everything that you said because I have many of the same thoughts and feelings. The one part that I wanted to add is it's a tool, just like any other tool in a conversation. So the way that I use it is, so I can't speak for other people and how they use it and whether or not it's appropriate, but at least on my end, I use it when I think the client could use a more concrete example. And that happens a lot with my first responders because so much of what we talk about in therapy is abstract. If I'm telling somebody that they need to have self-compassion for themselves, they're like, great, so what does that look like? It's always the next question. And so I can use either self-disclosure because it makes it personal and it's about me, or I can use disclosure from other examples and make it very vague, that would apply to other clients that I've seen so that they can put themselves in somebody else's shoes and get that concrete, tangible thing that they need in order to understand that concept more. But the underlying part of that tool usage is that there's a benefit for the client. And while the client might not be able to cherry pick out, oh, that was validation as a tool, that was, praise as a tool, that was self-disclosure as a tool, they should be able to say, I know why she just shared that with me. If it feels like it's coming out of left field, or you check back in and you're like, wow, it's been 15 minutes and they're still talking about themselves, that's not appropriate.
Yeah, and what Jenna, something you just mentioned is like when we do use examples from prior clinical interactions, your clinician should be de-identifying the crap out of what they're saying. There should be no way you can identify who this patient is, right? Should be very, very broad and again, using it for clinical utility. And then I guess something that I'm thinking about, and I haven't solidified my train of thought for this, is like, for me personally in the first responder military world, a lot of people ask like, what's got you in this field? Or what's your relationship to it? And in grad school, they're very like, don't ever self-disclose. It is the worst thing ever. Like, you got to be careful. It's very black and white. But then as you get more comfortable in the clinical world, you learn like there can be utility, like both Brooke and Jenna have said, right, of building therapeutic rapport. And so in those moments, I may decide to tell them, like, yeah, I'm married to a CAL FIRE guy, right? Like, that is my husband. He's not the primary reason I started in clinical psychology. Let me tell you an additional reason, right? So it's just, I think it just takes practice over time to know when it's appropriate and when you're doing it just to do it, I guess, or to vent, or yeah, like Brooke said, if somebody's doing that, then you should find another therapist.
Well, and
Yeah.
here's like a,
Oh, go ahead,
oh, go
Jen.
ahead, Brooke.
Me? Okay.
Okay.
Like two more thoughts. It's like all three of us do more than just therapy. We do critical incident response and programming. I public speak a lot, and I share about myself when I public speak, but I'm always thinking about, am I okay with whatever I say? I need to be something I'm okay with if there's potentially a client in my audience or a future client in my audience. Like my trauma and stress talk, we're talking about like, when you get in that hyper aroused state, like what it can look like. And I'll say, for me, I call it buzz mode, and I just go, go, go. You know, it's almost like I'm talking to my husband, but I'm really not. And I'm moving from one thing to another. And the next thing you know, the day's over. Like, that's my indication that that's going on, right? So I'm sharing that because it benefits my audience, not because I just want to talk about myself, right? And I'm okay sharing that if someone is in the audience that's going to be a client of mine in the future. Like, it can help connect in that way. So, and then the other thing I always like, a therapist should consider is, again, what you're sharing, like, is what I'm sharing going to impact or make my client feel some kind of way? Like, for example, if there's a therapist bawling on camera on her stories or on their stories or doing things like that, this is the worst day, this is what I'm going through, and you have a therapy session with them tomorrow, if that was my therapist, I'd be like, hey, how are you? Are you okay? Like, I would
Yeah,
feel so
controlling them.
uncomfortable, right? So that's the other thing is, yes, we're human, but this is our job too. And we have an ethical obligation to, if there's something I'm going through that's impacting me to the point where it's difficult for me to really be there, I'm taking time off, right? And there's, I think, a line too, you know, like a couple years ago, I shared, you know, like a post on Instagram when my dog suddenly passed away. And, you know, I took like 2 weeks off after that, but I'm not like talking about it, crying, doing all these things. You know, it's a vulnerability. It's, you know, this is difficult for me. I love dogs. I know other people in the first responder community connect with that. And like, it's that, right? So there is limitations to how much, because if it's going to affect you as the client going in and being like, oh, I'm kind of uncomfortable talking about me or coming in with my problems when I know that my therapist is fill in the blank.
I like that you said, Brooke, the different areas of clinical practice, right? Like trainings versus individual therapy versus maybe group therapy or even assessments. Like in assessments, because I do like fitness for duty, pre-employment, and so forth, you won't know anything about me. Like I never self-disclose because I'm supposed to be doing objective testing. And the way I present an assessment is completely different on how I present with a therapy client of mine. So yeah, I just wanted to point out, like Brooke, you hit the nail on the head. Like different areas of clinical practice may also show different sides of us,
Yeah.
not complete 180s. Jena, please go ahead. Sorry.
No, I love that you just said that because it actually segues perfect into what I was thinking. The virtual space is really strange because you have the same person that might have different angles of their professional business. And it's really hard to figure out how to create an intersection where all of that makes sense. So when Thalia is saying that there's a spot where she almost discloses nothing to another spot where she can disclose intentionally and you know with thoughtfulness per client, the way that her social media looks is going to be very different than if she only was in a space where she can do it, you know, based on the individual clients. And so when you look at generally licensed mental health providers, but definitely on the psychologist realm, we tend to be more reserved, more conservative in what we share because there is that consideration, not only in our ethical principles, but there's that idea that we're specialists and we work in lots of different areas. So like for me specifically, I try to be authentic. So I have people know I am a person a little bit. It's not just like some AI chatbot making all my content. So every once in a while, I'll post something about me being on the road or something about a workout. And I know that potential clients may be consuming that. And there's a reason for me posting that stuff so that when they get into session with me, if they're uncomfortable, they might say, hey, I saw you on social media. That's how I got your information. Oh, it looks like you might be into CrossFit. Easy in where we can talk for 3 or 4 minutes about have you ever done CrossFit? What do you do for exercise? I'm putting the heat back on them. It's not about me telling them about my PRs and you know all the classes I've taken. No, but it gives us a yeah. Sometimes I'll post a PR. But absolutely. But it's definitely one of those things where it gives you like just that little bit of humanness so that they're not walking into this awkward office that, you know, somewhere they've never been before, with a provider that they've never seen before with no foundation, but it's intentional and it's very, very limited.
Yeah, I'm gonna chime in here and say, like, as the first responder and service member, like, and we all talked about it, where it's like you're gonna do your homework on people. So if the therapist has a personal Instagram account too, like a lot of people have burner Instagram accounts and everything, and it's so easy to follow. And you can essentially be doing your homework on your therapist prior to even going into session, right? So if they see something that's not appropriate or something that they don't really get along with, or like something like you just had a breakup and then you're, like something not that, like you're going to therapy for that reason and you're seeing that therapist go through the same thing and it's not something that you want, like you should be looking up to your therapist essentially as like, help me get better. But if they're doing the same kind of thing, then I don't want it. So like, I'll say that our community will find the bullshit and we'll find the personal account and do some research there. And that's the last thing that you want, right? Like in our community, you want somebody to finally reach out to therapy, to go quickly, maintain confidentiality, and to have a good therapy session and to work with that therapist for a little while. If things don't work out, then get to another therapist. But I think it's such a fragile state for our community that if you go to therapy with somebody and it's a shitty experience, or you're doing your homework with that person and you don't like what you see and you're a few sessions into it, then you're like, okay, now I got to go through this process. Now I got to find another therapist. Now I have to restart over about this critical incident or this mission. So that's just my 2 cents.
It's a great way to like access and research is like, if you have social media, type in the person's name that you're thinking of reaching out to or that you just started seeing and like see what it's all about, right? It's a good way to do that. And like I tell people and they're like, okay, well, how much is too much if it's uncomfortable? If it's uncomfortable, like if you're seeing things and you're like, that makes me uncomfortable, that's it. Like that's it. Like find someone who, on the outset, that's like, I'm not immediately like, oh, that seems off, right? Oh, that's weird, but I guess it's normal because they're a licensed therapist, right? Mm-mm.
That's right. Okay, two more questions. Question number 17. We're skipping a little bit. What exactly is a rupture and how does it happen? How does a rupture differ from establishing or reinforcing a boundary?
I think about a rupture essentially as some kind of tension in the relationship where there's misalignment between what one party was trying to get across and what the other party heard. And when you think about how a therapeutic session might want to go, it's where you're trying to keep both the provider and the client on the same page, and they're going at the same pace, and they're communicating clearly and effectively, and then they end the session being able to summarize what happened, and generally the reality is the same on both of those ends. So same page. The misalignment happens when, and the most common one I see among first responder clients is where they feel judged or criticized or misunderstood in some way, or like they had to take over the session and take care of the provider where there was some sort of a power imbalance. Ruptures are common, and they're not inherently a problem as long as it's identified and acknowledged that it occurred, and then a repair attempt is made, which is pretty common if you have experience working, for a little while in the therapeutic space, and you can know what those warning signs look like. But as long as you can acknowledge that it's happened, there's an opportunity to repair that and move forward from it.
Yeah, you worded that really eloquently. So
Yeah.
I second what you said.
And I was gonna say, like, ruptures can help the person, like, I can help me phrase this if I'm saying this wrong, but like essentially it can help us use the therapeutic relationship to help them also improve the relationships outside of the therapeutic room, right? So if a rupture has happened, it doesn't always mean that something detrimental has happened, but there was a like discord in whatever was said. It didn't land, or it wasn't perceived the way the clinician was meaning, or vice versa, right? And so being able to have those conversations is fruitful because it builds our interpersonal skills as well. And a lot of times people are coming to us with symptoms that are also impacting their relationships with other people outside of seeing us.
I can give like one example. And this has happened a couple of times over the last few years. So with individuals who are suffering from like clinically significant anxiety conditions like panic disorder, for example, it's very common that unfortunately they've gone to a medical doctor and the medical doctor has prescribed them benzodiazepines. They take that anytime they're predicting that they might get anxious or have a panic attack, or to prevent one, and it keeps people really stuck and makes them much sicker in the long term. So again, avoidance, and then we address it with non-avoidance. But if I'm, let's say, working with a client who's coming in and they've been on benzodiazepines, I'll provide psychoeducation around benzodiazepines, the impact that they have, let's say, on panic disorder, blah, blah, blah. And I'll say, as we continue our therapy, I want to make sure we have a medical provider that's monitoring your medication, but ideally we're going to start tapering it down the further we move, because that's how you're going to eventually feel better. I've had it a couple of times as we're going through this, a client like who's very afraid to get off of medication, like get very upset and say almost like it feels invalidating, like I actually need this, like my brain's different. And then using that moment to reiterate, like, that's absolutely not what I'm saying, and let me clarify this. And then, like Thalia was saying, is, let's talk a little bit like what was coming up for you just then. Like, that, like, notice that, what was going, what's your fear of what might happen if you're no longer taking this? What are your concerns around this, right? So you can use it as a really, typically a really beneficial therapeutic point to that can then actually build the professional relationship between the therapist and the client if it's handled appropriately.
Cool. Thanks, ladies. Brings us to our last question. What does the process of repairing a rupture look like in the relationship? Does this take place in session? Does some of it take place outside of session?
Some of it takes place outside of session and more on the clinician side, right? Like, I will self-reflect, I will process, I will take time rather than reacting, right? Making an initial judgment. And then I will more than likely seek consultation, right? Because ruptures more than likely feel uncomfortable for our patients. They also feel uncomfortable sometimes for us, right? Because we're here to help our patients the best we can. And so when there's discord, we want to repair, we want to fix, because it sucks, right? To feel this way. And so outside work is us doing the work, right? Figuring out what came up for us, what do we suspect came up for the patient, how could we improve our behavior in that moment if improvements need to be made, and how can we broach the conversation during the next session, right? And seeking consultation if we want an outside unbiased perspective as well, to make sure that our train of thought is correct. And then in the actual session, I'm always bringing it up. If I feel like there's a rupture, I'm never gonna avoid just because of uncomfortability. It is our job to show our clients that they can give us feedback or express emotions to signify that something didn't land. And by us having those conversations, we're showing them that they can give feedback and that they could sit with the uncomfortability as well, right? It could be very therapeutic in nature.
Yeah, we might be the first relationship that clients have that can model what a healthy relationship looks like. And so ruptures are a really unique opportunity to be able to say that we could experience misunderstanding or whatever the rupture is related to, and still accept them and still want to improve on their relationship and still continue to work and help them serve their goals. So I think, like you had said, Thalia, getting that consultation, being very reflective, and then using the session space to really communicate what that means moving forward is helpful. Other components that I use generally is apologizing. So that could be a big one too. If you acknowledge it and you apologize, like, I'm sorry that, I misunderstood that, help me understand, clarify that. Really simple. It doesn't have to be this, the whole session's focused on the rupture, but little things matter a lot.
Yeah, I agree with both of them for sure. And I really like Thalia's clarification of like the work that we can do outside a session. But depending on whoever was asking this question, kind of going to all the stuff we've talked about before, it shouldn't involve like the therapist crossing boundaries outside the session and calling to talk or sending messages, things like that. The therapist can and should do some reflection on their own outside of session, potentially seek consultation, and then address that during the next therapy session, as opposed to crossing boundaries outside of it.
And sometimes I may add, like there are moments that clinicians may not notice that a rupture has happened, right? It may be very small, you may be really good at like hiding your reactions to something. And so not that it is the patient's responsibility to always bring up these conversations or these difficult moments, but it's also an opportunity for clients to give feedback, right? Like we're human too. Sometimes we may misstep or we may say the wrong thing that doesn't land, right? And that's okay. Or like Jena was saying earlier, right? We may not be meeting our patient exactly where they're at, and that's where a rupture can happen, right? And that's that's good feedback for us. But it's not your responsibility to continuously give us that feedback. And hopefully ruptures are not a common thing. If they're a common thing within your with your clinician, that is definitely
Sweet. All right. Well, that goes through all the questions. I do have one question that I think would be kind of cool for all the listeners that are first responder and military to kind of hear from the three of you. After giving all this expertise, answering all the questions and everything, what is one piece of advice that you would give to a first responder or service member searching for a therapist and finally reaching out for therapy?
I got it. If it's okay to go first. My biggest thing, and this may ruffle some people's feather, so
I
take
like
it or
it.
leave it.
Please go.
My biggest thing is that I think in the first responder and military world, we're really big on cultural competence, right? Understanding the culture, which is so important. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that. But I think what's even more important is finding a clinically competent clinician. Find somebody who knows how to treat your actual symptoms. Because if you go to your primary care provider and they work with law enforcement, but they're giving you the wrong medication, is really much going to change? Probably not. So it's the same thing, right? Like find somebody who knows how to treat what you're bringing to the table. And if they're culturally competent, that is a like bonus. It's not to say that they need to be separate, right? We want to find both, but if like you're in a really rural area where there's a lack of resources, go for the person that you feel confident can actually treat your concern.
And I'll
Did
bounce
it
off
ruffle
that.
any feathers?
I'm gonna keep ruffling the feathers straight from what you said. Um, is along those lines is find someone who is licensed. There
Oh my
are
gosh,
a
Brooke.
lot of coaches out there. I've seen the trauma coaches and the brain coaches and the resilience coaches. Everything. I've seen it all, right? Find a licensed therapist who also has the training, like Thalia is saying, but like that's the baseline.
Mhm.
Trauma coaches, etc. Because I had PTSD, let me help you with yours.
Mhm.
Absolutely not. I used this analogy earlier, but it's the same. It's literally the same. It's no different than if someone said, I had cancer, so I can treat your cancer. It's different than someone who's offering peer support, for example, like I've been through what you've been through, which is can be extremely um, helpful, especially in conjunction with someone actually seeing a licensed therapist. They're also utilizing their peers and their peer support. But peer support is different than therapy and a licensed therapist. So I highly recommend finding someone who's actually licensed and not someone who's using their lived experience and saying that they can then help you and they build a business off of it of coaching with no regulations. There's no regulations, nothing to protect the consumer whatsoever, along with of course not having the actual training in treating mental health. So yeah, find someone who is licensed.
Jenna, ruffle some more feathers for
Yeah,
us.
it was like feather rufflers we are. Yeah, I'm continuing on this train. Everything you guys said, I agree with. And when you think about all the questions today and what they had to do with, it was about trying to determine whether or not somebody's behavior is appropriate. So when you're looking for someone, I would say go for someone where you can hold them accountable. And that's going to be the license piece that you talked about, the culturally competent piece that you talked about, because you can actually verify that information. If something isn't jiving with the experience that you want to have, there are places you can go for that. Like my certifications that I have, my license that I have, consumers can go file complaints against those boards, and I can get those things removed if I'm not doing the job that I need to be doing. That's not the case if you see some random person who says that they're an expert because they thought it would be interesting and they want to be a trauma tourist. So do your homework on that part.
Yeah. I will say, I think that like I'll give a shout out to, like, he always comes to mind, Eric Tung, you know, at Blue Grit Radio. Like what he does, like his coaching is specific to, he's helping people pass the exams to get into law enforcement, get their promotions. Like you do not need to be and you shouldn't be like a licensed therapist. That's completely out of their scope, right? My point is like, if someone is seeking help for something related to, they're having trouble with their relationships, communication, nightmares, whatever, like all these things, licensed therapists, right? If you're wanting someone to help mentor you or coach you through how to get this promotion, you know, how to be the best in this field, for example, awesome, right? Like that is absolutely appropriate. But it's so saturated now with folks who'll say like, oh, I'm different than a therapist because I only focus on setting future goals. Like, yeah, no, like that's also part of therapy. If you're addressing helping someone's marriage or helping someone get through a tough time or any of that, that falls under the mental health sphere.
Got it.
Greg, it's your turn to ruffle some feathers.
Oh Lord. I I don't know if I want to say that. I had some come to mind, but it might be bad, and I don't know who's going to be listening
Okay,
to it.
don't say it, don't say
I'm
it.
not going to say it. I think just one of the things with us, like obviously, I never knew that talk was going to get to this point where we have contracted therapists in 49 states and over 75, and we created this smooth and confidential process, and then over $338,000 spent on therapy, over 300 people that have come to us, and I think one of the one of the things that I kind of see a lot is that like wanting to say that you work with first responders and military members just because that's like kind of the new thing to do, or like it's so easy to put on your website, oh, work with first responders, military, and then when we go to do the vetting or we ask like, okay, why do you want to do this, then they don't really have anything. Like we flew Brooke out last week to do a CU, which was amazing, and there are some therapists in the area that are like on their website and social media specializing in first responder, military, blah blah. Where the fuck were they? They didn't show up. So that's kind of one of the things where you get the people that are like, hey, I I want to work with the first responder military community. What kind of trainings can I take? They talk to my wife. They talk to Brooke. Oh, what can I do? What are some things? How long will this take? How do I become a top contracted therapist and help? And they're actually doing it for the right reason. So I personally hate seeing therapists trying to do it for the wrong reason. Because I mean, at the end of the day, that's like my brothers and sisters, you know what I mean? Like going to get the help that they need. But then also like I have some personal friends that go to therapy through some top contracted therapists. So I don't want some of my friends going to a therapist that I would never want to work with or contract with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Totally makes sense. I think we've all seen that. Should see our group chat.
I yeah. And that's the whole goal with talk, right? Is to have 3 to 5 therapists in every single state who have been vetted by us, so that when the first responder or service member is like, because they don't want to go through peer support, EAP, whatever, is like, oh shit, okay, it's finally time, right? It's 10, 12 years into the career. You're at the bottom of the barrel, and it's like, okay, I've waited too long. Now I need to go. So he or she doesn't have to go to Google and be like, therapist near me. And then that's a headache, right? That's a pain in the ass. So that's our goal with that. But
Yeah, because you go to Psychology Today and there'll be 1,000 therapists that say they
yeah,
specialize in
uh-huh.
50 different things. So
Yeah, and our community doesn't know what modalities to look for. They don't know CPT. They don't know um they don't know what to look for, what to ask in a therapist because nobody even talks about it. Nobody talks about it, right? You're talking about buying a new firearm or the new lifted truck for the firefighter community and laying in the comfy chairs watching a movie. Like that's what you talk about. You're not talking about like, hey, if you're gonna go see a therapist, Greg, what do you look for? What it's not a thing.
I think
So
it's so cool that you had us on and you're doing this, because I know the three of us have worked with many first responders and military that have, had rough experiences, but maybe like it was prolonged because you don't know what you don't know. And I know just even on the consulting, like wellness programming side, like I've worked with leadership on the consulting side that tell me like what they were working with before. And it was, someone that they were all seeing for therapy, that they were also all traveling with, getting dinner with, sharing presentations with, and this is their therapist, and like they were like telling, I've heard them tell me like I felt wrong for a while, but no one else seemed to, and it's just kind of like you question yourself because you don't know what you don't know. So I think it's really great that, we were able to answer some of these questions.
Yeah, I think this was cool. And I think maybe this is a thing like every few months or every 6 months to kind of do like a panel like this and some new topics or questions that kind of come up. And then we can get some more people on too. And and it kind of definitely breaks it up a little bit from just like the normal podcast kind of thing. So this was cool. I appreciate you ladies coming on. I do have one last question. Every single podcast, Brooke, you already know it's coming. You're going to go last because you've been on enough of these podcasts. But our motto at the Overwatch Collective is one more is one less. So it comes from a service member who lost more friends to suicide upon return stateside than actually overseas. So we always ask our guests at the end of every podcast what one more is one less means to them. So Thalia or Jena, I'm going to start with either one of you, and then Brooke, you'll carry in from the rear if you're okay with that.
I don't know if I haven't formulated this perfectly, but like, I think these experiences are planting seeds, right? So all the talks we do, all the podcasts we do, the consulting, the trainings, like it may not land with everybody, but it's planting at least one seed for somebody to reach out and get that support. And so I think that's where my mind went to immediately is like, even if we don't see an immediate like change from the efforts, we are helping those around us, and that's what we got in the business for.
Yeah, I feel very similarly. It's about holding space for an opportunity for somebody to be able to get the support if that's what they need. Obviously, it would be great if we were in a spot where we could control it and make it so that, everybody has the outcomes that we're looking for. But I look at myself as being able to put me in positions where there's an opportunity for people to take that. So thank you for giving all of us another opportunity to have a conversation that might, like Thalia said, plant seeds and give people that opportunity.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I'll share what I shared at the T.O.C last week that I weirdly got like emotional as I started to say it. And I was like, all right, I'm done. I'm off stage. I'm done. But
Yeah, you did.
like,
You did.
I have worked with people who quite literally like it was life-saving, and it was because of what you do, Greg. So, they wouldn't have been able to get that help because of financial constraints. And I've worked with people at the bottom of the barrel, as you said, who weren't really sure whether they wanted to keep living. And then, by the end of our work together, they're feeling much better and pretty good, and, new take on life, so to speak. So it really is one more is one less. And I can verify that and say that that's absolutely been the case in my experience as a talk therapist.
Sweet. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I know I'm just like the dude that does the podcast and primarily on the social media, but I always try to be aware and put it out there that like we have a team behind us that do so much work behind the scenes and everything. So definitely never want to be the person that's like, oh yeah, it's all the work that I do. You know what I mean? No. I don't know what to do with finances and treasury stuff, so that's why we have Cheryl. But there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. So as we say, it is a collective effort. So once again, I appreciate you ladies coming on. This will drop May 15th. I'll drop that in the morning. I'll cut some clips. I don't know how the clips are going to show up because there's 4 of us. But I'll try to put together some like reels and then like 4 to 5 minute clips for YouTube and social media, all that. And then y'all can use it for your websites or whatever you want to do. I'll send it all to you. But that's it. And then I will link everybody's email in the podcast description if y'all are okay with it. And then if anybody listening has any questions, they can reach out to me there.
Cool.
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks for having
Sweet.
us.
Yeah,
Of course.
thanks. Be
Thank
safe
you.
tonight.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Appreciate it. I'm not worried
Bye,
about
all.
being worried about. I'm worried about being dry
We were
and
just
stormy.
talking about that, hating working, doing shifts in the rain, and
Yeah, not looking forward to it. Well, thank you. All right, everybody, take care.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.